Okay, welcome to video 3, the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. So the big question you have to answer at the end of this video is, why is Iran our enemy? And it becomes a pretty simple equation when you look at the relationship between the United States in the 1970s through the 1980s. And then today it gets a little bit more complicated with current politics. But the roots of this rivalry go back, all the way back to a post-World War II Cold War rivalry. A reminder that in the first semester we talked quite a bit about the Cold War, and that after World War II there are two rising countries, the two most powerful countries in the world that were competing for power. And that's the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States, once again, is trying to spread democracy, capitalism, open trade, and the Soviet Union is trying to create a communist bloc. And the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, is trying to expand and get as many communist nations in the eastern part of the world as possible. And the United States is trying to prevent that domino effect. We saw the war in Korea, and later on we also discussed Vietnam as part of this Cold War conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1953, the United States got involved in the country of Iran. Here in the bottom left, we see our president at that time, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And Dwight Eisenhower and the United States government was part of a coup to overthrow the leadership of Iran. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to put a pro-American and anti-communist faction into the Middle East, so trying to increase democracy in the Middle East. So they installed this individual, Mohammad Reza, more popularly known as just the Shah, as the leader of Iran. So he's supposed to be pro-American, anti-communist. And really what happened here is the Shah became very loyal to the United States. The United States gave him power, and he was loyal to them with giving them oil at a reduced price. Well, the United States government really liked that, so no matter what the Shah did, we still liked him, and it was important to keep communism out of the Middle East. What we learned about the Shah over time is that he became a harsh dictator. He used his own form of secret police to exile and execute his enemies, and the most famous enemy that he exiled for speaking up against his leadership is a guy by the name of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And Ayatollah is an Islamic high priest. And Ayatollah Khomeini is exiled for 14 years, and he eventually spends that time in France before returning to Iran to overthrow the Shah. So in 1953, we put the Shah in power, and over time, he does not quite meet the ideological leadership that the United States would like to see in the Middle East. But he's not Soviet. He's not communist. So we support the Shah. In the 1970s, the Iranian people were tired of outside leadership, and it eventually led to a revolution. Violence began in 1974, but the true revolution didn't take place until 1979. The violence in 1974 begins in the capital of Tehran, which is where we're going to see the embassy stormed in a couple of years. The violence is anti-American, really anti-anybody that's not Iran. The Iranian people wanted their person in leadership, and in being a devout Islamic country, the Iranians wanted an Islamic republic. So they wanted a government that would be controlled by a religious leader. And as we've mentioned, that is a theocracy. As the violence increases, the threat on the Shah's life also increases. And the Shah, fearing for his life, and also just having a diagnosis of cancer, felt the need to leave the country. Under pressure, the Shah left for quote unquote vacation and never returned back to Iran. And that creates a power vacuum. So when the leader left, other people are racing to become the leader, and that's where Ayatollah Khomeini will come back to the country. So the Shah leaves in January of 1979. on quote-unquote vacation, and he visited only democratic nations so he could be protected. Two of the countries that he visits are Egypt, and then later on, the United States. And that's really where we're going to see more hands-on involvement with the United States and the Carter administration in Iran as a result of the Shah visiting the country. So when the Shah leaves, there's this power vacuum, and Ayatollah Khomeini returns to the country from France 2 weeks after the Shah left. The Ayatollah Khomeini is swarmed at the airport. We saw the videos in class. He gives a first speech, and the first speech is very anti-American, saying that the United States, they are criminals for being involved in Iran, referring to the 53 coup and overthrow of that government, the installation of the Shah. And he even mentions that all foreigners who have ever put their hands on Iran should have their hands cut off. The Ayatollah Khomeini is anti-American and anti-Jimmy Carter. With the Ayatollah, the high priest, now becoming the leader of the government, Iran has implemented a theocracy, a religious-based government in the middle of a democratic region, or at least what the United States wanted to be a democratic region. So the Ayatollah Khomeini becomes the leader of Iran, anti-American, and this is a big hit against United States foreign relations in that region. The Shah, who's on quote-unquote vacation, was seeking treatment for his cancer, and he eventually went to New York City. And the President of the United States this time is Jimmy Carter, famous for being the peanut farmer. And some would even nickname him Peanut, if you're Justice Chapman. But the Shah goes to a hospital in New York City, and originally Jimmy Carter didn't want him there because he knew that the Iranians wanted the Shah back for trial for crimes against humanity. The Ayatollah Khomeini and the Iranian people in the middle of their revolution demand that Jimmy Carter give the Shah back to Iran. Jimmy Carter says, no, we're not going to send him back. And Jimmy Carter kind of had to be influenced with that. But now it becomes a standoff between the Ayatollah Khomeini and Jimmy Carter. The Ayatollah gives a lot of passionate speeches that are anti-American. The Iranian students view this as a battle cry of anti-Americanism. And eventually they decide to storm the embassy that is in the capital city of Tehran. On November 4th, 1979, thousands, the numbers, I mean, it's not known because you don't sign up and then storm an embassy, but thousands are believed to be in the streets of Tehran, anti-American, and storm the U.S. Embassy. The embassy guards kept the rioters out for about 3 hours. And during that time, the embassy workers were able to burn a lot of the sensitive information that they had in there. But eventually they're overwhelmed by the Iranian people, and the embassy falls. And this is huge news throughout the United States, and the media covered this every single day. November 4th, 1979, 52 hostages eventually are taken. It was originally 66, but some were released for differing reasons. And eventually 52 hostages are kept, U.S. hostages are kept in that embassy building for 444 days. The President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, is in charge of negotiating the release of these hostages. And he's pretty unsuccessful in doing so. He loses a lot of popularity, and whether he would have won the 1980 election or not, probably would not have. But he is just destroyed in the 1980 election by our next president, which would be Ronald Reagan. So the hostages are kept for 444 days. Here are some images from that. Once again, none of the hostages were killed. The Iranians said that they fed them and treated them well, but that's not really the whole story. But none of the hostages were killed. They were released after 444 days. They were released on January 20th of 1981, and that's shortly after Ronald Reagan is sworn in. Reagan had already negotiated the hostage release prior to being sworn in. He said that we are going to trade with you again only if you release the hostages. The Iranians choose the money, they choose the economic strength, and the hostages are released. Now, this is not the end of Ronald Reagan's involvement in Iran. Later on in his presidency, there is a scandal with Reagan and secret dealings with Iran, as well as another terrorist organization in Nicaragua. Reagan had a couple of scandals during his presidency, but still remained very popular. And they called him the Teflon president. Teflon, nothing sticks to it. So they felt that he could get in trouble as much as possible or do whatever, but nothing was going to stick to him or he was going to get in trouble for it. Some other people did get in trouble, but Reagan, however, comes out of the office in 1988 with one of the highest approval ratings in history. The United States, as a result of these events with Iran in the 1970s and the early 1980s, has now created a new enemy. And the new enemy is Iran. And the Iranians will remain an enemy to this day. Shortly after the Iranian hostage crisis, we do have a war that breaks out between Iran as well as Iraq. And that's when the United States gets involved with Saddam Hussein.